This is Pentecost, when traditionally we read from Acts chapter 2. I will read just a few verses and leave it to you to read the rest of the story sometime today. From Acts chapter 2, when the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place, and they were filled with the Holy Spirit. In the last days it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh. Your sons and daughters shall prophesy, your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. As one of those old men, those words, shall dream dreams, say to me that instead of worrying about whether or not you're going to wake up tomorrow morning, dream instead about what you might accomplish when tomorrow comes. Pentecost. We Christians remember Pentecost as the day the Holy Spirit was sent to the disciples to ignite the preaching ministry of the church. It is helpful to know that what we call Pentecost was already an established holy day in the life of the Jewish community. Originally, Pentecost was a harvest festival that took place 50 days after the first gift of grain harvest given during the Passover feast. Hence the name Pentecost, Penta, meaning 50. Pentecost was celebrated during the month of Sivan, that is like the end of May, beginning of June, or about this time of year. And that might sound unusual to Wisconsin ears. A harvest festival in May? We're just getting our garden started. Israel does not have winter like we do here in Wisconsin. In Israel, they have all 12 months in which to grow produce. Literally, harvesting and planting can be happening on the same day year-round. In one field, the farmer is planting, while in the field next door, the neighbor is harvesting. And Jesus uses this and teaches that like the harvest in Israel, the harvest of souls is an ongoing 365-day per year process. And with the image of harvest in mind, God takes this day called Pentecost and repurposes it. What was once a celebration of the wheat harvest is now for the Christian church a celebration of the soul harvest. Acts chapter 2. The Holy Spirit came upon a large gathering, and 3,000 souls were added to the church. That alone is an amazing thing, but here's the brilliant part. Not only does Jesus send the Holy Spirit and convert 3,000 people in one day, Jesus does this during a festival when those 3,000 people, those new converts, are people from 16 different nations. Think about that, All those people are going to return home. On this one miracle day, Jesus sends 3,000 newly baptized representatives back to 16 different nations. This was Jesus planting the seeds for the future mission of the church, so that when the disciples go out beyond the borders of Israel, they will find the seeds of faith are already planted. They will find people who already know Jesus' name. They will find people eager to know more. Jesus has already demonstrated to his disciples how this planting and this harvesting works. Read Gospel of John chapter 4. Arriving at a Samaritan city, Jesus sits down by a well, and there he meets a woman from the town. He asks her for a drink of water, and a conversation begins that leads to the woman discovering that Jesus is the Messiah. She goes back home, tells people about Jesus. The seed is planted and the harvest is immediate. That very same day, people of the town come out to meet Jesus, and they invite him to stay, and many are converted. And this is how it worked. This is one model for harvesting souls. Jesus left his home. He led his disciples away from their comfortable place. He went to Samaria, a place not always welcoming to Jesus and his disciples. They walked to a city full of people who would rather that they just keep on walking. And Jesus sat down by a well, and he waited for an opportunity. And if we are to follow Jesus' example, it may mean that we will have to leave our comfort zone, go out and find a place where people view us maybe with suspicion, sit down at their local watering hole and opportunity. Wait for someone to come by with a bucket so we can ask them for a drink of water. And you can question Jesus' method, but you cannot question the outcome. It worked. It results in a harvest. Turn back now to Acts chapter 2 with me. Another teaching from Pentecost is the miracle of understanding. In the Pentecost story, the disciples were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. So all those people from 16 different nations heard the gospel being proclaimed in their 16 different languages. Speaking their language is a powerful tool in getting our message across to people of different nations. That's something I've had to learn and relearn along the way. While a sailor in the Navy, I had to learn the language of my fellow sailors. And in addition to sailors' very colorful vocabulary, I had to learn things like not to say right side or left side. On board ship, you say port or starboard. And one of the practical reason for this is pointed out by another sailor who said, on board ship, not everybody is facing the same direction. On board ship, everybody is working, facing different directions. And then he gave me the easy way to remember which is port side of the ship and which is starboard. He said, if you face the bow, the front of the ship, the port will be on your left-hand side. The words port and left both have 4 letters. Speaking the local language clears up a lot of confusion. From the Navy, I went on to college and graduate school, and I unlearned many of those colorful sailor expressions, and I learned a lot of new words from my teachers, big words that scholars use to teach us about the Bible. And I went to my first church with all those new words, and I started preaching the Bible. And one day, one of my loving parishioners came up to me, and he said, Pastor, it is obvious that you know more about the Bible than any of us here, but I'm afraid we're having a hard time understanding you. And I took that to heart. And I set to learning the language of my congregation. I discovered that the gospel can be preached without a lot of really big words. I noticed how Jesus uses simple, common, easy to understand language and still communicates profound truth. Wherever the church goes, we need to learn their language. John and Charles Wesley, founders of Methodism, learned this one day when listening to folk songs being sung on the streets and in the taverns of England. Realizing that music is a kind of language, they composed hymns using those folk tunes. The tunes were already familiar, and people had an easy time learning new songs to old tunes. And I remember the first time someone told me that Christian punk rock bands were performing at church events. And my first thought was, Christian punk rock? We're a contradiction. Punk rock was rooted in the anti-Christian movements of past decades. Punk rock music often expressed satanic messages. And then I thought, what better way to drive Satan out of the music than to take it over and put Christian messages into the lyrics? Punk rock, it's not in my comfort zone, but if it helps to plant the seeds of faith in another person's soul, I will gladly listen to a punk rock band.